the Yom Tov of Shavuot is so different than any of the other Chagim, because the other Chagim carry with them not only Kedushat Hayom, sanctity of the day that regulates specific activities, but also carry with them specific mitzvot. So on Pesach, you have the matzah and maror and the seder, and you have the prohibition of chametz. And on Sukkot, you have the eating in the sukkah and taking of the 4 species, the arba minim. But on Shavuot, the only thing you really have is the Yom Tov factor, that it's a day that there are a number of restricted activities, almost as much as Shabbat, but not as much as Shabbat, as we all know, that permitted to cook, and anything that's required for food. And then, by extension, certain other necessary things can be done on Yom Tov. But there's no specific mitzvah. And if somebody tells me learning Torah, I mean, you all realize that's absurd, because the mitzvah of studying Torah is not limited to 1 day a year. And the Kabbalistic custom that originated about 400 years ago of Tikkun Leil Shavuot, of staying up for the entire night of Shavuot in order to undo the damage of what the Medrash says, that Am Yisrael overslept the morning of Har Sinai. And it was most embarrassing, because just 40 days later, on the 17th of Tammuz, when it came to getting all hepped up for the golden calf, the Egel HaZahav, everybody came first thing in the morning. It was like the Vatican minyan, very, very early. So how was it that for Matan Torah, people overslept, and for the Egel, people were very much diligent and on time? So we're not going to be able to answer that for the generation that came out of Mitzrayim, but the Kabbalists felt that this deserved some correction, and therefore they would stay up the whole night of Shavuot with Torah study, so that nobody would ever accuse them of coming late to Matan Torah Shavuot morning. You see, this is one of the cases of where a Kabbalistic minhag then becomes popular and becomes widespread throughout the people, and loses some of its original impact, where in certain circles, staying up on Shavuot night is nothing but a social. And as a social, if that's all it is, it'd be best that people go to sleep and get a good night's sleep and come back to shul in the morning and at least daven properly. Unlike what I have personally experienced, witnessing people at the first minyan at 5 in the morning on Shavuot who are so asleep that they're really davening while they're sleeping. I always say some of them are saying tachnun because they're falling on their arms while they're davening musaf, and it's really not a davening. I've suggested to people, if you're going to do that, then after Kriyat Torah, go home, make kiddush, eat a short breakfast, take in a nap, come back to shul at 10 o'clock for musaf, and daven musaf like a mensch. I mean, but we're not going to be able to correct that. But this year, because of our unique situation, so the shuls are not going to have, either they're not going to have programs at all at night, or certainly not extensive programs. And much of the learning is actually being done on, these days, today, tomorrow, yet on Erev Chag, tonight, on various Zoom programs of various institutions. It's just a wonderful thing to see that we can prepare ourselves for Shavuot, not just the night before, but even a day and a half before. And it's very, very, very nice. So we're going to talk about one of the customs of on Chag HaShavuot, and that is to indeed eat chalavi, which we grew up with the Yiddish word milchik. But before I do that, I just want to make one commercial announcement. I'm holding here the printed version of Torah Tidbits. Now, this is something new. Why? Because for 2 months we didn't have a printed version of Torah Tidbits. All Torah Tidbits was online at the OU site. And this week, for the first week, they came out with the printed version. And I have a request from the one at the Israel Center who is in charge of distribution, Tony Trinowski. And she's desperately looking for somebody who would volunteer on a weekly basis to come by the center on Rehov Keren Yesod on either Wednesday or Thursday and pick up a batch so that all נחama people can get the Torah Tidbits. So I have her phone number here. You're not prepared to write it down. I'll just say it if anybody can remember it. But if somebody wants to write to me, I'll be happy to forward her phone number, and you can volunteer to be the person to bring the Torah tidbits every week. It's 050-577-2111. Tony Katrinovsky, she's in charge of the distribution. Okay, end of commercial message. So, eating cheesecake, Ugad Gvina, and other chalavi, dairy parts of the menu on Chag HaShavuot. Where does this come from? The truth of the matter is that source number one on the source page is, even though it's Shulchan Aruch, it's something that anybody going through Shulchan Aruch should really know. It's somewhat, it's not ambiguous. It's somewhat hidden. It's like sitting in the background, and many people are just not aware of it as being a primary reason for why to have a dairy meal on Chag HaShavuot. We are familiar with what the Mishnah Brura tells us. That's the Chavetz Chaim, who dies in 1933 at age 90-something, upper 90s. And we grew up with what the Mishnah Brura says. So let's just start with the Shulchan Aruch, and we'll see most probably something novel. Shulchan Aruch says as follows: "V'noagim b'chol makom le'echol ma'achal chalav b'yom rishon shel Shavuot." And it is customary to eat a dairy meal on the first day of Shavuot. Now this is Rav Yosef Karo writing, who lived in Tzvat. Yet it is clear that he wrote this. He put these words together before he arrives in Tzvat, because he's talking about 2 days of Shavuot. You remember we used to have such a thing, 2 days of Shavuot. And on the first day of Shavuot was the custom to have something chalavi, or as we called it in Yiddish, milchik. Venerally, hatam, and I believe the reason is, he says, kimo shehu kimo hashnei tafshilin shelokchim b'leil seder, leil Pesach. We know that on the Seder plate, we have 2 cooked items, which we today call the zroa and the beitzah, the shank bone that's roasted. And if you don't have a shank bone, of course, you can use a polka, whatever it is. You put it over the fire and you put it there. And that's to remind us that once upon a time we had a Korban Pesach. And the most Ashkenazim will use the hard-boiled egg as the second one, the beitzah, whereas in the sources, it talks about shnei tavshilin, 2 cooked items, whatever they may be. But for Ashkenazi purposes, we're talking about the zroa and the beitzah. That just as there is such a custom to place on the Seder plate, on Seder night, the 2 tavshilin, 2 cooked products, the zroa and the beitzah, zeh lePesach v'zeh leChagiga. One is to remember the Korban Pesach, and the other is to remember the Korban Chagiga, and this has to do not with the Korban, the sacrifice that was brought when one came on Aliyah L'Regel to Beit HaMikdash, but as part of the Seder meal, we would eat a meat of a different Korban that we had a nickname, Chagigat Arba'a Asar, the Korban Chagiga of Erev Pesach, of the 14th, so that when you ate the Korban Pesach, you already were full. You were already eaten. And Korban Pesach was almost like a dessert. It was actually called the Afikoman, which is a Greek word, but it means the dessert. And if we would have the Korban Pesach as the main dish, people would be eating quite a few amounts, great amounts of the Korban Pesach. But the sheep could go and be sliced to so many portions of so many different families, because it was only eaten at the end, the way we eat the matzah afikomen at the end. But most of us are not terribly excited about eating another portion of matzah, because we've had a matzah and had a morah, or had a sandwich of matzah, morah, had a meal. And if you stuff yourself with knedlich, you're really not interested in more matzah. And the only reason we eat the matzah of the afikomen is because there's a mitzvah to eat it to remember the Korban Pesach. That's the type of satiated feeling that one has, what's called ne'echal al hasova, when one ate the Korban Pesach. So you needed something else to fill you up, and that was the Korban Chagiga. And hence on the Seder plate, we had these 2 markers, the shnei tavshilin, the 2 cooked products, or the zera or beitzah. So that we know from Pesach. Kain ochlim, therefore we also eat ma'achal chalav va'achar kach ma'achal basar we should be eating on Shavuos at the same meal, but separated, a dairy meal and a meat meal. V'tzrichim lahavi imahem shtei lechem ala shulchan. You're going to be forced by halacha to have different breads or chalot on the table. Shehu b'mkom hamizbeach. The table, as we know from various sources, is a replica of sorts of the mizbeach in the altar in the Beit HaMikdash. That's why we put salt on our bread, because the korban had to have salt, and other reasons of that. But what we should be doing here is remembering that on Chag HaShavuot, there was a korban called Shtei Alechem, the two breads, mentioned in Parshat Emor, V'yesh bazeh zichron l'shtei alechem shayu makrivim b'yom habikurim. That these two breads were offered on Chag HaShavuot, nicknamed b'yom habikurim, which, by the way, is not to be confused with the mitzvah of bringing the first fruits, but it has to do with the ripening of the wheat that takes place at this time. So that is Chag HaShavuot, b'yom habikurim. And we say that in Musaf, based on Parshat Pinchas, b'yom habikurim, and so on. So the two breads offered on Chag HaShavuot was actually the flip side of the Korban HaOmer that was brought on the second day of Pesach, Mimocharat HaShabbat, on the 16th of Nisan, and that was brought from barley, and the Shtei Alechem was brought from wheat, and not only from wheat, but it was prepared as good, solid, delicious bread, chametz te'afena. It had to be chametz, which is rare in the world of Korban Mincha, the grain offerings. This one had to be chametz. It had to be good bread that you would enjoy, and so on. And then there's much symbolism to the idea of the Shtei Alechem. In order to force us to bring two breads onto the table, so the Shulchan Aruch says we use a little bit of a gimmick. There is an independent halacha that's mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch of Yeridea. It's down in source number 5, and that is that we are actually not allowed to bake anything. Before you jump to conclusions, listen to the whole sentence. You're not allowed to bake anything from dough that has milk as an ingredient. Well, what does that mean? You can't have a milk cake. You can't have bread that might have butter in it. The opening number is you're not allowed to do this. And what was the concern? That erroneously somebody's going to take that piece of bread and use it for a meat meal. Shema yavo lochla ima basar. The imlash, and if you did knead the dough with milk, kol hapat asur, the whole bread loaf is forbidden. Afilu lochla levada, even just to eat it as a piece of bread, not to eat it with milk or fleischer, just to have it as a piece of powerful bread. However, here comes the big but. Im hayad davar mu'at kedei achila bevat achat, if the amount of what was being baked was so minute that it serves as a portion for one person, it's just a one portion type of bread. Or sheshina tzurat hapat shetehei nikeret shelo yochal ba basar, that the way the dough was prepared, it was prepared in a shape that's unusual to other breads, then you'd be able to eat it with meat. You'd be able to eat that milky bread, of course not with meat, but if it would be recognizable that nobody would ever confuse that bread by putting it on the table with meat, then that kind of bread is permissible. I'll just give you a very good example, barakas. So barakas comes as a portion. Some people eat 2 barakas, 3 barakas at a meal, but each barakas is an individual portion. So do you ever notice that the cheese barakas are triangular and the other barakas have a somewhat of an oval shape of sorts? That's not an accident. That's done so that it should be recognizable before you put your teeth into the barakas. You know that this is the cheese barakas, and that's very, very important. Now, with regard to, for example, challah, so the Ramah, continuing in source number 5, the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles says, therefore, nohagim lalush pat im chalav b'chag HaShavuot. They used to prepare bread with milk on Shavuos, where everybody understood that these breads were specifically for the Yom Tov and were having milchic meals, so we would be able to have bread that had a milk component in it. And he tells us that there were people for challah on Shabbat would use a fat to bake the challah. They would use all kinds of meat fat. Gam beshuman l'chvot Shabbat, ki kol ze nechshav kedavar mu'at. The bottom line is you're making 2 challahs. That's not a lot of bread. It's not a tremendous production. V'gam ki tzuratan mishuna mishar pat. It's already an old standing custom that the challah for Shabbat is braided. And by braiding the challah, it looks different than any other bread product that we may buy. And hence, there wouldn't be a problem. People would see the shape and they know this is for Shabbat. And on Shabbat, we have bisari, we have fleshing. And therefore, it wouldn't cause a problem. So going back to that first source, what we have here is a suggestion from the Rabbi Yosef Karo that the custom of having milk meal is to guarantee that we're going to have a second meal because it's Yom Tov. And on Yom Tov, you have fleishiks. That's what you do on Yom Tov. Ein simcha ela b'basar. But if you are just going to have a bisari meat meal, you're never going to be able to force ourselves to bring a second bread. The only way to force ourselves to bring a second bread is if first we have a milk meal, a dairy meal, and that brings out 1 bread, and then you're going to wait some time and then have a second meal, and the second meal is going to be out of meat, and you'll have another bread because you're not going to be able to use the bread from the first meal for the second according to this regulation. And hence, we were forced to create a scenario of putting 2 breads on the table for Chag HaShavuot, and we're going to remember the Korban Mincha of Shtei Alechem of the 2 breads. This was what's brought down in Shulchan Aruch. Comes the Mishnah Berurah, and he teaches us something that I recall in first grade. You know, sometimes what you're taught in first grade and second grade is not the things that are the opening number in Shulchan Aruch, but sometimes esoteric things we're taught. You're taught all kinds of midrashim and things of this nature. So the Chofetz Chaim tells us, Vani shamati od, I heard, b'shem gadol echad. He doesn't name who he heard this from, but by introducing this as saying, Ani shamati od b'shem gadol echad, he's saying it's not a medrash. It's not in the sources. But I heard some great person quote the following. Sha'amar, Tam nachon, sounds very, very plausible. Ki be'et shamdu al Har Sinai v'kiblu Torah, at the time that Am Yisrael stood at Har Sinai and received the Torah, and then he has in brackets, Ki baseret hadibrot nitgale lahem al yedei kol chelkei haTorah, kemo shekatav Rav Sadia Gaon b'shaseret hadibrot klula kol haTorah. By saying kiblu Torah at Har Sinai, what exactly did they receive? So if we just open up this computer window and say, what did they receive at Har Sinai? They received 10 commandments, the Aseret HaDibrot. And maybe the process of the writing of the Torah, of God dictating to Moshe Rabbeinu from Breshit bara Elokim et hashamayim va'aretz, continues until the end of Sefer Shmot, maybe until the end of Sefer Vayikra, but that's it. And then from later on in the desert, a year later, things pick up. And then in the middle of Parshat Shlach, where we're doomed to another 39 years in the desert, Sefer Dvarim is written 39 years later. So the Torah is actually completed much later down the road, and it didn't happen at Har Sinai. So the Rav Sadia Gaon says that in a sense, and he didn't use the word genetics, in Hebrew we call it Torasha, but there's a certain genetic code of every mitzvah in the Torah embedded in the 10 Commandments. And all you have to do is be a geneticist to figure it out. Just like somebody who understands the DNA is going to, if somebody can read the DNA, and today people do know how to read a DNA, they will be able to tell you certain characteristic traits of the person. And it makes no difference if the DNA came from a cardiac cell, a skin cell, even though the cells ultimately differentiated into different types of tissue, but the DNA is going to remain identical. So if you get a DNA from a skin cell or a brain cell or cardiac cell, we can tell you if that person had blue eyes or brown eyes, and whether he was a gingy, had red hair or blonde hair or black hair, whether he was going to be tall or short, whether he's going to have a disposition to certain illnesses and certain behavioral patterns. Everything that we know today as genetic can be read in the DNA. Rav Sadia Gaon, 1,000 years ago, believed that when you read the Aseret HaDibrot, you can actually sift out indications of all the 613 commandments. Okay, you have to be pretty brilliant to get them all, but some of them we can figure out on our own. And because of this idea, the Mishnah Berurah says, quoting this Gadol Echad, that on Har Sinai we received the entire Torah, the Yordu Menahar, and then Moshe Rabbeinu came down from the mountain, the people went home. So Lo Matzu Ma Lechol Techef, after Har Sinai, they had to eat lunch. Okay, so what are we going to eat? And the only thing that they found that they could eat after receiving mitzvot was dairy products, because meat products required an enormous amount of preparation. You had to slaughter, shecht in Yiddish, lishchot b'sakin baduk. You had to have a proper knife for the shechting, for the slaughtering, and you had to be able to take out the various fats that were prohibited, chaylev and gidan asher perhaps, and deal with the blood, the salting of the animal, and they had to cook it in new vessels, because the old vessels that they may have used the night before had non-kosher taste in them within 24 hours, so those vessels are off limits as well. And the only thing that they were able to pull out of the refrigerator was, some cottage cheese, and they had chalavi. Now, I remember growing up on this idea, and this became pretty axiomatic. But it turns out that others had different ideas, to the extent that many, many questions were actually asked about these various suggestions, interesting halachic suggestions of what may have happened. Indeed, whoever said that milk was permissible for them? There's a whole discussion that perhaps until the Torah was given, milk was from an animal was prohibited because of Ever Minachai. It's something that comes from the live animal. And who said you're allowed to eat Ever Minachai? Who said you're allowed to drink milk or have milk products? And the Gemara discusses this and says that the Pasuk giving the blessings of Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, Eretz Yisrael would never have been blessed with something that's non-kosher. And hence, the chalav in the flowing of milk, it's just an image of being fruitful and plenty and sweet fruits and so on. That's what the Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash means in a formal sense, but in a literal sense, it means milk is flowing. The only time I saw milk flowing is just last week when I had a delivery from Supersol, and a container of milk was half opened, and it led a tremendous pool from the elevator of my house until my door. So I figured that was Eretz Zavat Chalav. There was no Dvash there, but I had to clean up the Chalav. But I don't think that's what the Torah meant when it said Eretz Zavat Chalav. So it means that the Chalav had to be something that was kosher. And by the way, the Gemara, and I'll give you a source, it's Masechet Bechorot Davav, says that's how you know that bees that make the honey, and a bee is a sheretz, you're allowed to eat the honey as well. So one reason that the Gemara says is because if Eretz Yisrael is blessed with dvash, then it's got to be a halachically permissible item. Of course, some claim that the dvash there means dates, dvash tamarim, and so on. But that's a different discussion. So you have here a question that how in the world did they eat, have milk? Because it was the first opportunity they're hearing that milk is permissible, so therefore they're going to have milk. And then some of the interesting commentators raised the question, 1 second. Do you remember back in the days of Abraham Avinu and Vayera Elav Hashem Be'elomei Mamrei, and the 3 guests show up, angelic figures, and Abraham Avinu offers them milk products and meat products, and they're eating them. So there's a whole discussion. This is before Matan Torah, and Abraham Avinu never thought that they were part of the fold who will become Am Yisrael, so he could give it to them, or maybe, and then some will say, 1 second, take a look carefully, and you see that he gave them the chalabi first, and then afterwards the bisari. So this was done with a cheshbon, with a calculation that he's not going to give them meat and milk together, and so on. It becomes a whole discussion. If somebody wants to make a whole shir on basar v'cholov, that becomes an interesting source. But you have here 2 reasons why the idea of eating milk and milk products on Shavuot. There's even a third, it's a little bit way out. That's the number 3. It's the Magen Avraham, one of the commentators on Shulchan Aruch, and he quotes a Zohar, which is a Kabbalistic source, a major Kabbalistic source, and he says that the 7 weeks that we count from Pesach to Shavuot, Shiva Shavuot Tispor Lach, somehow remind us of the 7-day counting that a woman will count from the time that the Nida period technically comes to an end, and that she'll be able to go to the mikveh, the Shiva Nikiyim. So what does this have to do with basar v'cholov? So there's actually a saying in Chazal that mother's milk, it comes from a process that comes from the dam, from the blood. Now, I'm not sure this is physiologically sound. I mean, the blood is a liquid that goes through the body and transports all the nutrients necessary. So no doubt a mother requires the various nutrients to be brought to the place where the milk is going to be manufactured. But whatever it is, the Zohar says that dam has been transferred or converted into milk. And this becomes symbolic that midat hadin, which is absolute justice, which is harsh and cruel sometimes, has been converted to milk, which is compassion. It cannot be a more beautiful picture of an image of compassion than a mother nursing her baby. So that's compassion. And therefore, we have moved from din to rachamim on Chag HaShavuot with the Torah, and that's why we took upon ourselves to have milk and milk products on Chag HaShavuot. An interesting idea. But the same Magen Avraham cautions, and he said, source number 4, and he says, be careful. The asur le'echol basar v'chalav milechem echad. Can't use the same bread. Therefore, na'agu le'afoto im chem'ah. De'az bevadai yitztarech la'avi lechem acher le'echol im basar. The minhag, the custom was that for Shavuot, to bake the challah of bread with butter, not with margarine or any other oil, but to make sure that you understand that this is milchik, this is a challah, and you'll force you later to bring out another bread to have the meat. And again, falling back on what the Rabbi Yosef Karo said, this is going to be the reason for the milchiks. So, because we want to remember the 2 breads, that's really important. And the having of the milchik, the dairy meal, is just a technique that will force you to have 2 such meals on Yom Tov of Shavuot. Just a word about the milchik breads. So I remember back in the States, we used to buy, some people would go to the bakery and, buy fresh bread and so on. Not every city in the United States or in Europe have the luxury of going to a bakery like we have here, whether it's Angel Bakery, Berman's Bakery, any other bakery that bakes fresh bread. And they all have a tu'dah from the Rabbanut and so on. They all took off challah. And you could just go in and buy it and, wash and make a bracha moitzi and eat. Not a question. But there are places in the world that you just can't do that. So there are certain leniencies if we're dealing with a public baker, and each local rabbi deals with it independently. But what you do have in the United States, at least in the States I remember this, was packaged bread. So packaged bread comes from a factory. A factory has a mashgiach. So that's good. So you have the hashgacha. How many, we're all familiar with the OU and the Chav K and the OK and the Star K. Somebody asked me, who's the mashgiach in Gan Eden? So it's very simple. It's Yud K Vav K. You know, God's the Mashgiach. He's going to be the Mashgiach up there. So you have all these hashgachot. About 25 years ago, there was a program on Motzei Shabbat, a documentary, and of all things, it was about hashgachot, kashrus supervision in the United States. And I thought this was really nice. It was done by an Israeli staff, a crew. And they interviewed various people and so on. And they reported, and this is going back to 25 years ago, that at that time, there were already 225 symbols of kashrus in the United States. Now, most of them were very local. Only a few were national. So OU is national, Chavke is national. You can get it in any store from New York to Los Angeles and anything in between, and so on. Star K, which was Baltimore originally, but then it became national. Some are statewide. So if you're familiar with the state, you know that what the Boston, the Massachusetts Rabbinut looks like. You know what the Chicago Rabbinut looks like. You know what they look like. The Lone Star, Texas, with a K in the middle. You know what that looks like. So some people are travelers. They go city to city, Sherwin, right? And you pick up, you know that they're local hashgachot that are on the local level of the state. Some are even more local. Some local shul rabbi gives hashgacha on a falafel store, and he designs for himself a little symbol. So they reported 225 symbols of kashrut throughout the United States, which was amazing, absolutely amazing. And then they explain why there are so many symbols of kashrut. And the biggest story there was they interviewed somebody in Texas who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. I hope I don't have to explain here to this audience who the Ku Klux Klan is, but I would just say that if you meet up with somebody, run away fast, especially if it's a dark alley. You don't want to be there. The loaded anti-Semites and anti-black that you have in the United States. So this fellow ran a potato chips company. He had a plant, and he had hashgacha. He had a heksha on the potato chips. So the Israeli reporter said, "1 second, you belong to the Ku Klux Klan, and what are you doing paying a mashgiach?" I mean, the whole thing didn't make sense. So he very nonchalantly said, "Killing Jews is one thing, and selling it to them is something else." I mean, I don't see a problem. Do you see a problem? That he has to sell the potato chips to somebody. So, if he has the opportunity to kill you, he'll kill you. But meantime, he can sell it and make a good buck out of it. So the hashgachot would appear on the cellophane wrappers of the packaged breads. And one of our teachers at YU, Rav Yosef Weiss, who was an expert in Yoredea, he was upset that some of the breads coming out of Wallbaum's chain and others, so it had the Chavke, and in Chavke it said Chavke Parv or Chavke dairy. And he said, how can you have a Chavke dairy on a bread product where all you're doing is indicating that it's dairy on the outer wrapper? The Shulchan Aruch says that the bread has to be baked in a different shape so that when you look at the bread, you know that it's not a regular bread, but it's chalavi, it's dairy. But just having it in the bag, you could take those bread slices out, and then it just looks like any other sliced bread, and you're liable to make a big mistake. And so too, do you remember the most delicious baked product in the United States? Thomas's English muffins. Remember Thomas's English muffins? It carried the OU. But Thomas's English muffins had a second product that was a Thomas English muffin with onions. No, that's very nice if you like it with onions. There was only one catch. It said OU dairy. It was an OU product, and it was chalavi. On the wrapper, they had a suggested serving, like they do many times in products, and it was with a hamburger inside. So they're telling you, this is a great, great piece of bread that you just slice the middle, put a hamburger in, and it's delicious. And it's chalavi. It's milchik. And look, the OU let it happen. And I asked some of my acquaintances there at the OU, and the feeling was that today we are educated consumers. And there's something to this, that the idea that today Jewish education has risen to the level that people understand that you check wrappers when you look for hashgachot was good enough to sidestep the restrictions that are mentioned here in Shulchan Aruch. That's interesting because that's a shiur in itself of how a new approach, perhaps, to the way we see processed foods and so on. How does that impact on the way the halacha was as it was documented in Shulchan Aruch over 400 years ago? But be it as it may, you have here some of the origins, and what you see, and remember how Rabbi Rav Soloveitchik said once, if there are too many reasons to answer one question, you know one thing, we may not have hit at the source. There are too many answers why we eat chalavi, and it's not just because it tastes good. It's we're groping in the darkness and making suggestions. But something interesting comes up. It's actually incidentally raised in a responsum from Rav Avad Yosef, the Shelot Tshuvot Yechaveh Dat of source number 7, and that is on Yom Tov itself. So there's a mitzvah of Simchat Yom Tov. So it's the Rambam who teaches us that while the Gemara tells us, Ein Simcha Ela Bebasar, Simcha, you have to have a good fleshik meal. Simcha is a good bottle of wine. Ein Simcha Ela Beyayin. Rambam says, that's not what real Simchat Yom Tov is all about. Those are simply stimulants to put you into the proper mood so that you can achieve the real Simcha. So what is the real Simcha? You recall in the Tochacha, in Parshat Kitavo, the Torah says, Tachat asher lo avadet et Hashem b'simcha u'b'tuv levav, because you didn't serve God with Simcha. And you know the pasuk, we say it in Mizmor Todah, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha. I mean, Chassidim make a big deal to do about this. Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha. Bratslav, mitzvah gedolah, liot b'simcha tamid. What does that mean? Does that mean we should be feasting on good choice meats and drinking fine wines, and so that we should be b'simcha? Rambam says that's not what it is. Simcha means a sensation, a feeling of touching God, of being in close rendezvous with God. And where does that take place? It takes place at Beit HaMikdash. The only place. Shalosh pamim b'shana yera'eh kol zchurcha et b'nei Hashem Elokecha b'makom asher yivchar b'chag hamatzot b'chag hashavot b'chag haSukkot. On the 3 Yomim Tovim, 3 festivals, you have to move yourself out of your home from wherever you live and come to Yerushalayim and come make a rendezvous with God. That is the Simcha. And that Simcha is actually amplified on Chag HaSukkot, with the whole theme of the Yom Tov is getting together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokechem shivat yamim. Beyond the mitzvah of taking the Arba Minim on day 1, there was another mitzvah, and that was to take the Arba Minim for 7 days, a full 7 days, in the close proximity of Beit HaMikdash. Usmachtem lifnei Hashem Elokechem shivat yamim. And that's why we call Chag HaSukkot Zman Simchatenu. I mean, all the other Chagim are also days of Simcha. The Rambam tells us Chag HaSukkot has Simcha Yetera, has additional Simcha. And it's a day, it's a festival where we want not only Am Yisrael to come touch a little bit divinity as much as a human being can, but the nations of the world shall also. And that's what the Navi Zechariah tells us in the 14th chapter, which is the Haftarah for the first day of Sukkot, of the nations of the world coming to Beit HaMikdash. And that's why today we have already a reenactment of this, of nations of the world coming on Chol HaMoed Sukkos and doing a march in Yerushalayim in identification with Am Yisrael in Eretz Yisrael. It's a phenomenal idea that's happening in our own eyes, in front of our own eyes, and so on. So this is what the Simcha really means. And what Rambam says, because people are perhaps living in a depressed life because of political hazards, economic strife, and what have you, as Am Yisrael had the last 1900 years. So you need something that's going to perk you up a little bit and put you in a good mood, because if you're not in a good mood, there's no sense in meeting up with HaKadosh Baruch Hu on that level that's necessary for Yom Tov. So the Rambam gives us a few good ideas. He says, look, you have to get the wife also perked up and moved. So maybe she's not interested in a good bottle of wine. Maybe she is, but maybe she isn't. Make sure she has a new set of jewelry for Yom Tov. And the kids, make sure the kids have some nice sweets and chocolates. Rambam says this. Rambam goes down to the nitty gritty. And he says how to get kids smiling. You give them nice candies and confectionery products. They're going to smile, and you get them into a good mood. This is important because we know from Tanakh that those who were sad, they were deprived of prophecy. It's starting with Yaakov Avinu already when he finds out the apparent loss of Yosef. He loses his contact with God for 22 years. And we see it also with Moshe Rabbeinu in the desert for so many years that there was a little bit of a blackout there. And we see it with other Nevi'im, and we see it with Shaul HaMelech, who is depressed, and we see it with Elisha HaNavi, who's depressed, and they asked to bring out the musicians, and the musicians perked up a nice song, they played it, they made it into a concert, and they felt better. They felt better. So if you think that music therapy was developed by modern day psychology, you're wrong. It's already in the Tanakh of music therapy. And it works. It actually works. And here Rambam said that food therapy works. And you get people excited about a good meal and so on. That's not the point of Simchat Yom Tov. That is just the excuse so that we should be in a good mood and work our way up to being in close contact with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the question is, and if I don't like meat particularly, or perhaps I'm a vegetarian and I don't eat meat, do I have to eat meat on Yom Tov for the purpose of Simchat Yom Tov? Interesting shaila. And it was kicked around between two of the greats of the days of the Achronim, which is the last 300 years. So you have the Sha'agat Aryeh. Sha'agat Aryeh, his name was Rav Yuda Aryeh Leib. He was the Rav of Metz. Metz is a town in Germany. He was an all-star of the greatest of that period of the Achronim. We're talking about from the 17th, 18th, 19th century. We're talking about people in the league of the Vilna Gaon and the Nodab Yehuda, Reb Cheskel Landau, and the Chatam Sofer. He was up there, the Sha'agat Aryeh, and he wrote a sefer that is a sefer on halakha, but there are essays in halakha that are very, very deep, complicated, and only the sharpest of minds have the ability really to comprehend exactly what the author of the Sha'agat Aryeh was saying. I can just say the following, that the Rebbe, the Rav, Zichron Livracha, told my brother, Rabbi Yosef Adler from Teaneck, many years ago, that when he, the Rav, was 10 years old, he prepared bar mitzvah speeches for his buddies in the town of Chasalovich, where his father served as town rabbi, based on the book Sha'agat Aryeh that he had already completed. Now I'm talking about a book that is used today in the world of Torah as a litmus test for somebody who's a serious Talmid Chacham. So if he's a baki, he's knowledgeable in the Sha'agat Aryeh, this man is serious. The Rav knew the book at age 10 and was able to create Divrei Torah for his buddies for their bar mitzvah speech, so they can show off a little bit in front of their parents and friends about the Sha'agat Aryeh. So it became very, very common in certain circles that when you make a bar mitzvah speech, even though the average kid didn't have a clue what he was saying, it was a parrot. But nevertheless, the Rav taught 13-year-olds, when he was 10 years old, parts of the Sha'agat Aryeh. Just parenthetically, many years ago when the Interior Minister Aryeh Deri was in jail in Kela Ma'asiyahu, so his buddies opened up a tent yeshiva right outside the jail, and they called it Yeshivat Sha'agat Aryeh. So that Shabbos, when I was rabbi in Ramot, so somebody saw the book, the sefer on the shelf, the Sha'agat Aryeh, and he asked me, "What? They put out a book already?" And that was fast. They already put out a sefer, the Sha'agat Aryeh. I said, no. This is not these chevra. This is the real Sha'agat Aryeh. So the Sha'agat Aryeh said that if you enjoy something else other than meat for Yom Tov, let it be. So enjoy it. You want potato blinches and or something else. Gesundheit, eat whatever you want to eat, and for you it makes you simchadik. So that's what you have. Ben and Jerry's ice cream goes on the table. That's what you have. And the Reb Chaim Halberstam, who was the Rebbe of Sanz, the beginning of the Sanza dynasty, He was a student of Rab Naftali from Rubchitz, who was a student from Reb Elimelech from Lizhansk. So Rab Chaim Halberstam, who is the father of the grandfather of the Bobover Rebbe and the great-grandfather of the Klosenberger Rebbe, who founded Kiryat Sanz in Netanya. So there's a whole dynasty now of the Halberstams. I can tell you that when I got engaged to Miriam, her family name is Halberstadt. But the Rav, and I told him, he misheard it. And he said, Sansa? I said, no. They're from Frankfurt, Germany. There are no Sansas in Frankfurt, Germany. It's Halberstadt, not Halberstam. So the Rav Chaim Halberstam, in his book Divrei Chaim, wrote that you must necessarily have meat for Simchat Yom Tov, and it cannot even be chicken or turkey. Can you imagine? It can't even be chicken or turkey. That's second-grade meat. That's not real McCoy meat. You have to have basar behema davka. So we've got this big dispute here between the Shagat Aryeh and the Divrei Chaim. So there are many who say, yes, we're going to have chalavi on Shavuot, but because there were some poskim who were very adamant that because it's Yom Tov, you have to have meat, so we're going to have a meat meal as well to go along with and you have to just separate with time a little bit. From chalavi to bisari, it's not a big deal. Maximum waiting time is an hour. Some have the custom of waiting 31 minutes into the hour, and some don't even have a waiting time at all, but just washing your mouth out and then making a bracha achrona, a final bracha of the first chalavi meal, and moving on to the bisari meal, which would be okay. And each family conducts itself according to its family custom. But the last issue that I just want to round it out with is that there are some who had leniencies on Chag HaShavuot with waiting time between meat and milk. While most of the poskim say, do not, I repeat, do not adopt any leniencies in the way we conduct ourselves the whole year. That's how we should conduct ourselves on Shavuot. But just bring to your attention that there was a view that said that on Shavuot, on the day the Torah was given, you have this experience of standing by Har Sinai right in front of your face. There would be less reason, if not no reason, for rabbinic add-ons that have been included into the world of halakha. Because why are there rabbinic add-ons? To set up a fence so we don't, God forbid, come close to the biblical prohibition line. So if we make a demilitarized zone, we move the prohibition out a little bit further, and we know that we now have a new border, so we'll protect ourselves from never violating a biblical prohibition. But there's an interesting idea that at Beit HaMikdash, when the Sanhedrin sat there and functioned, they were like the mashgichim over everything going on there. So in the area of Beit HaMikdash, there was never a need for a rabbinic add-on because they would be able to watch and be careful that everybody was doing things properly. There's a concept called Ein Shvut B'Mikdash, no rabbinic add-ons in the area of the Beit HaMikdash. On that note, there was some who claimed that on Chag HaShavuot, we all have that feeling as if we are in front of Har Sinai and God is talking to us. And therefore, obviously, we're going to do things right. And if the Torah says that you're not allowed to cook meat and milk, so obviously we're not going to eat a cooked product of meat and milk. But if the whole idea is just separating it by meals, and now comes along the question of how much time, so the time factor we can let loose a little bit on Chag HaShavuot with regard to the waiting time, even from meat to milk. And there was some poskim who said that on Shavuot, you'd only have to wait an hour between meat and milk on Chag HaShavuot. Again, the overriding sentiment of the poskim is what I just said now is a theoretical thought. Don't adopt it unless it's your family minhag, and I'm not here to challenge your family minhag, but this was summarized by, in the Shelot Teshuvot, Mishneh Halachot of source number 8, and his name was Rav Menashe Klein, Zechron L'Bracha. I remember Rav Menashe Klein. He was a Rav in Borough Park for many years. He came in Aliyah to Ramot Daled in the Ungvar community and set up a kollel. a very, very big Talmud Chacham and Posek, and he wrote, "Ube'inyan ma shenagu b'shavot harbe kulot." People have a custom of many leniencies with regard to meat and milk in terms of the time framework. So at the end, he's aware of them, but he says if you don't have a family custom to that effect, you should not be taking it upon yourself such a custom, but rather you should maintain the same status as we have throughout the years and observe whatever time framework it is. And I'll just tell you that when I taught Masechet Chulin in Beersheba in the high school, this is the days before we had internet and anything like that. There was a thing called a blackboard. Do you remember such a thing in school with chalk? There was a blackboard and chalk. Some people don't, when I talk to my grandchildren, they don't have a clue what I'm talking about. Blackboard, gear, what's a gear, So on the blackboard, I put 9 different opinions in the world of halacha of waiting time between meat and milk. The most exaggerated is found in the Gemara itself. It's 24 hours. That if you ate bisari at 2 in the afternoon, you wouldn't have chalabi till tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. But the Gemara says, rejects it. It says, Avu de Mar Ukva, the father of Mar Ukva said, my father did this and that, but I don't have that. It's already rejected in the days of the Gemara. A good thing, because today in the world of Chumrah, who knows who would pick this one up as a new one. But even the 6 hours comes in 3 flavors, 6 full hours, 5 hours and 31 minutes, 5:01. Again, it's a family minute thing. The Ramah talks about 1 hour, and then he upgrades to 6, and many people from Holland still maintain the 1 hour. When I taught at the Midreshet Moriah for young ladies from Chutz La'aretz, a girl told me, I don't care who I marry as long as he's Dutch. So, she can go to this 1 hour view. And the Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Yechiel Mechel Alevi Epstein from the Varduk says that this 1 hour view is still on the books for people who are not well, who have digestional issues, and for young children. And this is a very important statement, that the 1 hour was not rejected. It was just overridden with the 6 later on, but the 1 hour is still on the books for needy cases, similar to, eating egg matzahs on Pesach, as it says on the Ashkocha, kasher Pesach for zkenim, for children, ktanim, and sick people. So we have such a category. So too with the 1 hour. And then you have this compromise view that Rabbi Sperver writes in his book, Minagei Yisrael, of what evolved as the German Jewish custom of the 3 hours as a compromise between the 6 and the 1. And everybody does what they do. And until we have a Sanhedrin, we're not going to be able to make a consensus on this. But at least for Chag HaShavuot, which is coming up, I wish each and every one of you a very, very good Yom Tov. Hopefully, we're going to have nice davening. The government upgraded the numbers of having 70 people in shul, and a shul that has 2 levels, like we have in Ol נחama, we can have 50 and 50. So we can basically sustain 100 people in the shul for Shabbos. Please bring your mask, bring your machzer. We'd like people not to have to use the clay kodesh of the shul, and the windows will be open. It shouldn't be terribly cold, but we need the cross ventilation, and we're being very, very vigilant here. Sherwin has been terrific in formulating the rules and regulations, and Baruch Hashem, we're able to do this. I can tell you that in Chutz La'aretz, they're just light years behind us on this, while the government in New York State has announced that shuls can open with 10 people, but the great Rabbanim said, don't do it for another 2 weeks, and then let's see what the situation is. And I'm talking about Rav Shechter from YU and Rav Willig from YU, Rav David Kuhn from Brooklyn, and they incorporated Rav Osher Weiss from our own Ramot Gimel, a big Paisek, strongly recommending not opening up yet in the United States. But here, Baruch Hashem, slowly but surely, we're getting there. And I can tell you that I was at Sam's Bagels this morning in Ramat Eshkol before I paid a visit to my mother in Neve Amit, and I had a bagel sandwich, and I was able to sit down and eat there. I don't know, I wanted to cry or make a shechiyanu or something. It symbolized that we're getting back we're getting back into things. And in Mitzvah Hashem, Kadosh Baruch Hu should give us all the bracha of good health, and we should be able to have many, many, many great times and smachot together. Chag Sameach.